A veteran Navy SEAL came to the north to disappear. But his retired German Shepherd K9, Nix, refused to let the forest stay quiet. One strange scent, and the dog pulled him off the trail like it was a mission. Beneath moss and pine needles, Cade found a concrete seam, too straight to be nature. The next day, the ranger and sheriff opened a forgotten bunker, and a Cold War jet waited inside. Then a metal name tag appeared, Elias Rowe, along with a letter warning not to sell the truth. Where are you watching from today? Comment your location and like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. Northern Michigan wore early summer the way old legends wore crowns. Quietly, without asking anyone to kneel. The lake behind Cade Holloway's cabin was a sheet of hammered blue glass, bright enough to sting the eyes. Sunlight spilled through tall pines in coin-sized patches, gilding moss like a priest blessing an altar. Somewhere out on the water, a loon called. One long note that sounded less like a bird and more like a warning the earth remembered. Cade stood on his porch with a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, as if warmth had become a luxury he no longer trusted. He was 43, tall, about 6'1", with shoulders built like a doorframe and the solid, compact strength of a man who had once carried weight that didn't belong to him. His face was sharply cut, strong jaw, high cheekbones, and the rough shadow of a short beard that refused to grow politely. His skin was sun-browned, not the carefree kind, more like the kind earned by work and weather, and long days spent outside because indoors left too much room for ghosts. His hair was cropped short in the military way, dark brown with premature silver at the temples, practical and unromantic. His eyes were the color of stormlight, blue-gray and deep, the kind that seemed to measure distance even when staring at something close. There was an old military watch on his wrist, its face scratched and honest. The rest of him looked like he'd dressed for a life that required readiness more than style. An olive field jacket with worn elbows, dark green cargo pants, a red and deep blue plaid shirt beneath, and brown leather boots softened by years of use. A pocket knife clipped in place like a promise. An Eberly stock half-track backpack sat by the door, half-packed, as if it never quite got to retire either. People in town said Cade kept to himself because he was proud. They were only half right. The truth was, Cade had learned the hard way that crowds could be louder than gunfire. Not because of sound, because of meaning. Too many eyes, too many questions, too many easy stories people told themselves so they wouldn't have to sit with complicated ones. And Cade's life, lately, was made of complicated stories, stacked like firewood. A soft click of nails on wood interrupted his thoughts. Nick stepped onto the porch with the quiet authority of a creature who believed the world could still be read correctly if one paid attention. The German Shepherd was lean and muscled, built for motion rather than bulk. His coat was black and tan, short and dense, glossy in the sunlight like oiled leather. His stance had a working dog's certainty, feet planted, spine steady, head slightly lifted as if receiving messages from the wind. Nix's eyes were dark and intelligent, and when he looked at Cade, it was not with worship, but with something closer to partnership, as if he were silently saying, "I will follow you, but don't assume you're always right." Nix was retired now, at least on paper. But retirement didn't stick to him. The discipline stayed in the bones. The watchfulness stayed in the breath between breaths. Cade took a sip of coffee and grimaced. This tastes like regret. Nix's ears flicked once. That was his version of a laugh. Cade crouched and scratched the dog's neck, where the fur grew slightly thicker. Nix leaned in, one brief moment of warmth, then stepped away, as if affection was acceptable only in controlled doses. All right, Cade murmured. Patrol the kingdom. Nix trotted off the porch and moved around the yard with a familiar pattern. He checked the fence line, the woodpile, the narrow path that led toward the lake. Cade watched him with something close to gratitude. Back when Cade's own mind tried to ambush him, back when a sudden sound could yank him into old deserts and older nights, Nix had been the anchor. A steady presence, a living compass. A breeze shifted. Nix stopped. His head lifted. His body went very still, like a statue shaped by instinct. One paw hovered above the grass for a heartbeat too long. Then his nose went up, inhaling in slow, deliberate pulls. Cade's posture changed without his permission. The old reflex rose like a tide, shoulders square, breath quiet, attention narrowing. "What is it, buddy?" Nix didn't look back. He turned toward the tree line and walked, pulled, as if a thread had been looped around his ribs and tied to something deep in the forest. Cade set his mug down and sighed. "You know retirement means relaxing, right? Not hunting ancient curses." Nix kept going. Cade grabbed his pack from the porch and followed, boots thudding softly over pine needles and damp earth. The forest swallowed them in green silence. The air smelled like resin, wet bark, and something bright. Wild ferns warming in sunlight. Shafts of light cut through the canopy, turning dust motes into tiny planets. It was beautiful in the way mythic places were beautiful, as beauty that promised comfort and danger in the same breath. Nix moved with purpose, weaving around roots that rose from the ground like old knuckles. Cade kept pace, scanning out of habit. He told himself he was just walking a dog. He told himself a lot of things. Nix slowed near a thicket where the underbrush thickened. His tail stiffened. He sniffed the ground, then the air, then the ground again, tracing an invisible line. Cade frowned. The smell hit him a moment later, faint, but unmistakable. Oil. Not fresh motor oil, not gasoline. Something older, drier, like machinery that had been sleeping too long. Nix's head snapped toward a patch of moss near a fallen log. The moss looked ordinary at first, lush, green, sunlit. Then Cade saw it. A straight edge. Too straight. Nature did curves and chaos. This was a line drawn by hands. Nix pressed his nose against the moss and exhaled sharply, as if the ground had offended him. Cade knelt and brushed away a little of the green. Beneath it, gray concrete, weather-stained and cold. His stomach tightened. Concrete didn't belong out here, not like this. He peeled back more moss, careful, like touching something that might bite. The concrete continued in a smooth plane, disappearing under leaves and rot. A seam ran along one side, thin as a scar. Nix let out a low, restrained sound. Not a growl, not a bark, a warning in miniature. Cade's hands paused. In his mind, a memory flickered. Sealed doors, metal breath, the weight of stillness before something changed. He blinked it away, but the echo lingered. He pulled out his phone and took photos from multiple angles, his movements calm but measured. Then he opened his GPS and marked the coordinates. Nix watched him do it, ears high, eyes tracking the woods behind them every few seconds. Cade tried a joke to keep the air from turning too heavy. "If you had an employee badge, I wouldn't have to work this hard." Nix glanced at him once, unimpressed. Cade exhaled a laugh that didn't quite make it to his chest. Yeah, I'm the sidekick." He stood and stepped back from the concrete. Every instinct in him urged him to dig, to pry, to open whatever this was and face it like a man facing a storm. But he wasn't a storm anymore. He was trying to be a shore. So he did the responsible thing, the thing he hadn't always been able to do in other parts of his life. He called it in. As Cade lifted his phone to dial, Nix suddenly froze again, harder this time. Not alert, not curious, haunted. The dog's gaze fixed on the seam in the concrete, and his breathing changed. Shorter, sharper. His body lowered slightly, as if bracing for something unseen. Then, with a slow deliberateness that made Cade's skin prickle, Nix backed away 3 steps and sat. Sitting was not fear. Sitting was a command posture, a working posture. Nix stared at Cade, then at the seam, then at Cade again, as if insisting this is not just a hole in the ground. This is a place that remembers. And then Nix did something Cade had never seen him do before. He whined, quietly, almost privately, and pressed his nose to Cade's hand. A single touch, gentle, urgent. It landed on Cade's nerves like a prophecy. For a split second, Cade felt it. The forest holding its breath. The way water stills before lightning. A thin current of cold air slipped through the seam beneath the moss, so faint it could have been imagined. Except it smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies and rain. Cade's mouth went dry. "Okay," he whispered, to Nix or to himself. "Okay. We're doing this the right way." Nix didn't move. He simply watched, steady as a lighthouse. Cade dialed the ranger station first. Forest Ranger Owen Pike answered on the second ring, voice flat and practical. Cade pictured him instantly, mid-40s or so, broad-shouldered in the understated way of men who carry tools more often than weapons. Probably a weathered face from living, outdoors, a beard kept short out of convenience, and eyes trained to see what doesn't belong. Trash, tire tracks, illegal camps. The kind of man who didn't waste words, because the woods didn't either. Cade explained what he'd found. Concrete, a seam, the smell of old oil, coordinates marked. He kept his tone controlled, like he was reporting a situation that could turn complicated. Owen asked a few sharp questions. How big? How deep? Any visible hazards? Cade answered cleanly. Then Cade called Sheriff Lena Crowley. She picked up with the brisk confidence of someone who ran a small department and a large responsibility. Cade had met her once at the hardware store. She was in her late 30s or early 40s, strong and steady, with dark hair pulled back tight and a face that looked carved from patience and iron. There was a calm in her voice that didn't come from softness. It came from experience, the kind that had learned people could lie. But evidence had its own language. When Cade told her the coordinates, she didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss him. Her seriousness tightened the air. "Stay clear of it," she said. "Don't open anything. I'll coordinate with Pike and meet you nearby. You understand?" Cade looked down at Nix. The dog remained seated, watching the seam like it might blink. "I understand," Cade said. And he meant it. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, listening. The forest returned to its usual sounds. Wind through needles, insects humming, distant birds. Yet something in Cade's chest stayed tense, like a drawn bow. He crouched beside Nix. "You did good," he murmured. Nix blinked slowly, then nudged Cade's hand again. Not affection. Confirmation. Cade swallowed. The world had been simple for a while. Fix boats, buy groceries, avoid conversations that dug too deep. But the forest had handed him a seam in the earth, and Nix had marked it like fate. Cade stood, backed away from the concrete, and began guiding them back the way they came, careful not to leave obvious tracks, careful not to touch what didn't belong to him. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Cade glanced over his shoulder. The moss looked innocent again, sunlit, soft, harmless. But the cold slip of air still haunted his skin like the ground had exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, Cade felt the old sensation of standing at the edge of something that would change him. Nix walked at his side, calm and deliberate, a guardian in fur and silence. Behind them, beneath the moss and the myth, the seam waited, quiet as a sealed mouth. And the forest, ancient as any god, kept its secret a little longer. Morning came slow and deliberate, as if the forest itself were deciding whether to allow the day to begin. Cade Holloway stood at the edge of the tree line, where the dirt road narrowed into two faint tire tracks. The air still carried the night's coolness, clean and sharp, and the lake beyond the trees reflected a pale sky that hadn't yet chosen a color. Nick sat at his left side, posture perfect, ears angled forward. The dog's calm was intentional. Work calm, not rest. Cade adjusted the strap of his Eberlestock pack and glanced down. "Remember?" he muttered, half to himself, half to Nix. "We're observers today." Nix didn't respond. He didn't need to. His stillness said enough. The first truck arrived with little ceremony, a forest green pickup with mud on its tires and a Department of Natural Resources emblem faded by sun and years. Forest Ranger Owen Pike stepped out before the engine fully died, already scanning the tree line as if the woods were capable of lying to him. Owen was built like the land he protected, broad through the chest, thick-armed, sturdy without being showy. He wore a ranger's uniform that had clearly seen more seasons than paperwork. Creased at the elbows, dulled at the knees. His beard was kept short and practical, peppered with gray, and his eyes had the hard clarity of a man who had learned to read damage the way other people read books. Tire tracks, broken branches, trash where it didn't belong, silence where there should be birds. "Morning," Owen said, voice low and unadorned. "Morning," Cade replied. Owen nodded once at Nix, the nod of one working professional to another. "That him?" Nix lifted his head slightly, acknowledging the recognition without enthusiasm. "He's retired," Cade said. Owen snorted. "They never are." A second vehicle arrived moments later. Black and white, clean lines, local plates. Sheriff Lena Crowley stepped out, her presence immediately altering the air. She moved with contained authority, tall and steady, her dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense knot. Her uniform fit like it had been tailored for duty rather than comfort. There was no visible weapon on display beyond the standard sidearm, but her posture carried weight enough to quiet conversations before they began. Lena's eyes took in the scene quickly. Cade, Nix, Owen, the forest, the narrow road. When she spoke, it was with calm precision. "Mr. Holloway?" "Sheriff." She gave Nix a brief look. "Good dog?" Nix blinked once. High praise, accepted. They walked together toward the site, the forest closing in around them as if curious. Cade stopped where the concrete lay hidden beneath moss and leaf litter. "It's here," he said. "I didn't touch anything beyond brushing off the surface." Owen crouched, pulling on gloves. "Appreciated." They worked methodically. Owen cleared vegetation with careful, practiced movements, revealing the concrete slab in full. It was larger than it had first appeared. Thick, reinforced, unmistakably deliberate. A seam ran across one end, faint but straight, like a line drawn by a ruler and then forgotten. Lena took notes while Owen checked for structural hazards. Air quality came next. Portable sensor, quiet beeps. Cade watched from behind the temporary boundary Owen set with tape and cones. This was the part Cade respected. The slow, unglamorous work of making sure curiosity didn't turn into catastrophe. Owen straightened. No immediate gas. Structure looks stable enough for a visual inspection, but no entry until we've got clearance. Lena nodded. Agreed. We document first. Cade felt something ease in his chest. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together until the law arrived and did its job. They uncovered the door. It was heavy steel, recessed into the concrete, its surface pitted by age and moisture. Hinges thick enough to bear weight, a locking mechanism that hadn't been touched in decades. Owen whistled softly. That's not civilian construction. No, Lena agreed. It's not. When the door finally opened, it did so reluctantly, metal protesting in a low groan that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Cool, stale air spilled out, carrying the smell of damp concrete, old lubricant, and something else. Time itself, maybe. Flashlights cut through the darkness. The space beyond was wide and cavernous, the ceiling high enough to swallow sound. The beam of Owen's light swept across the interior and landed on metal, curved, riveted, unmistakable. Cade's breath caught. Inside the bunker rested the long, silent body of a jet aircraft. Its shape was sleek, even in decay, wings folded close like a bird that had chosen sleep over flight. Dust lay thick across its surface, dulling what had once been a light gray, metallic finish. Faded U.S. markings were barely visible beneath streaks of rust and moss that crept in from the counter's open door. A Cold War-era trainer, Cade thought. Not a weapon of conquest. Something built to teach, to test, to prepare. Lena exhaled slowly. Well, she said, that's something. Owen stepped closer, careful where he placed his boots. Looks like an evaluation bird, trainer or test platform. Been sitting a long time. Nix waited at the threshold, muscles tense but controlled. Cade caught the question in Owen's glance. He's trained, Cade said. Won't move unless told. Lena considered for a moment, then nodded. All right. Slowly. Cade placed a hand on Nix's harness and gave a quiet command. Nix stepped inside, movements deliberate. He didn't sniff wildly or pull forward. He simply looked. The dog's eyes traced the length of the aircraft, reading it the way Cade once read terrain. Nix approached the nose, stopped, and sat. Not alarmed, not curious, respectful. Cade swallowed. He understood that posture. It was the way soldiers stood in places where noise felt wrong. Owen documented serial numbers where visible. Lena radioed in preliminary findings and ordered the area secured. Red tape went up, access restricted. This is now a protected site, Lena announced. No removal, no tampering. We'll notify the state and loop in historical preservation. Cade nodded. He hadn't expected anything else. And still, hearing it made something inside him loosen. He volunteered to assist with perimeter security, eyes and ears, nothing more. Lena accepted. Trust, Cade knew, wasn't granted lightly. It was built from 1,000 small, correct choices. As Owen finished photographing the aircraft's tail section, Nix shifted. It was subtle, a change in weight, a tightening along the spine. Cade noticed instantly. Nix turned his head toward the far wall of the bunker. Not the aircraft this time, but the concrete itself. He took 2 careful steps forward and paused, nose low, ears forward. Owen glanced over. What's he got? Cade didn't answer right away. He watched Nix closely. Nix wasn't reacting the way he did to animals or intruders. This was different. Focused, analytical. He moved closer to the wall, then stopped and sat again, gaze fixed. Lena stepped nearer, lowering her voice. Is that a signal? It can be, Cade said quietly. He's marking something. Owen shone his light where Nix stared. The beam revealed nothing obvious, just stained concrete, hairline cracks, watermarks. Ordinary if you didn't know how to look. Nix lifted his head and looked back at Cade. Then slowly, he reached out and pressed his nose to Cade's hand. One brief touch. Cade felt a chill ripple across his shoulders, as if a line had been drawn between the past and the present and he was standing right on it. "Noted," Lena said after a moment, writing it down without comment. The moment passed. Work resumed. But Cade couldn't shake the feeling that the bunker had more to say and that Nix had heard it first. By early afternoon, the site was fully secured. Signs were posted. Calls were made. The forest returned to its rhythm, as if satisfied the interruption had been acknowledged. Owen packed up his gear. "We'll bring in specialists," he said. "Archivists, aviation historians. Might take time." "Time's fine," Cade replied. Lena closed her notebook and met Cade's eyes. "You did this the right way," she said. "Not everyone would." Cade shrugged. "Didn't feel like mine to open." Nick stood at his side, calm once more. As the vehicles pulled away and silence reclaimed the clearing, Cade remained for a moment longer. He looked at the bunker door, now closed again, sealed by modern tape and ancient weight. Some things, he thought, didn't need to be rushed. He turned and guided Nix back toward the path. The forest welcomed them with familiar sounds. Light filtered through branches, the world moved on. But behind them, beneath concrete and moss, a story waited, patient, intact, and no longer entirely alone. By the end of the week, the town had learned how to whisper. Rumors moved the way birds did, never alone, always in flurries. At the bait shop by the lake, men leaned closer over coffee and spoke in half sentences. At the grocery store, conversations paused when Cade walked past. Nobody asked him anything directly. They didn't need to. Mystery had a gravity of its own. Cade hated it. He'd spent most of his life learning how to disappear in plain sight. How to blend into crowds when blending meant survival. Now, standing out felt like being backlit by a sniper's scope. Still, when Sheriff Lena Crowley asked him to stay involved, strictly for safety and continuity, he agreed. Walking away would have felt like leaving a watch unfinished. The library sat near the center of town, a low brick building with wide windows and a flagpole that creaked softly in the wind. It smelled of paper, dust, and time. Cade hadn't been inside since his first winter here, when the cold had pressed so hard against the cabin walls that even silence felt loud. That was where he met June Waverly. June was in her early 60s, tall and slender, in a way that came not from frailty, but from years of standing carefully among fragile things. Her hair was silver white, worn in a loose bun that never quite stayed put. Strands escaped and caught the light like spider silk. She wore thin-framed glasses low on her nose and dressed in muted colors, soft blues, warm grays. Clothes chosen not to demand attention. Her hands were what Cade noticed most. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if every motion had weight. Fingers slightly bent from age and arthritis, but steady, capable. The kind of hands that had learned patience the hard way. "You must be Mr. Holloway," she said when Lena introduced them. "Cade is fine." June smiled, not wide, not polite. A smile that suggested she understood the difference between names and labels. "June," she said, "I take care of the town's memory." She didn't say library. She said memory. Inside the secured bunker, June moved as though the space itself were sacred. She spoke softly, not because anyone told her to, but because some places demanded it. Flashlights cut pale tunnels through the dimness as she examined a rotting wooden crate recovered from a side shelf, its contents bagged and tagged by Ranger Owen Pike. Inside were remnants of paper. Photographs curled at the edges, a maintenance log eaten through by moisture and mold. "Most people think fire is the great destroyer," June murmured, adjusting her gloves. "But water does more damage in the end. It's slower, more patient." Cade watched as she lifted a photograph with tweezers, supporting it with a thin backing. The image showed a group of men standing near an aircraft. Faces young, uniforms rumpled, smiles uncertain. He couldn't tell which decade it was from at first glance. The past had a way of blurring its edges. June didn't speculate aloud. She catalogued, measured, photographed. Each piece went into protective sleeves, sealed carefully. "Nothing gets interpreted yet," she said, as if answering a question Cade hadn't asked. "First, we preserve. Understanding comes later." He nodded. He understood that instinct. You didn't rush toward meaning until you'd secured the perimeter. Back at the library, June set up a temporary preservation station. Dehumidifiers hummed softly. Special lamps cast gentle, even light. Cade stood nearby, hands in his jacket pockets, feeling like a guest in a temple he didn't quite belong to. Nix lay near the doorway, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. He was aging, 9 years old now, but his presence still carried authority. His black and tan coat had begun to gray faintly around the muzzle. He didn't sleep deeply anymore. Work had taught him that stillness and awareness could coexist. June noticed him watching her. "He's very quiet," she said. "He listens," Cade replied. She nodded. "So do the best archivists." They worked through the afternoon. June explained the basics of document triage, how moisture warped fibers, how ink bled but sometimes survived. Cade found himself drawn to her approach. There was no urgency, no drama, just care. "You're gentle with it," Cade said at one point. June glanced up. The past has already been through enough. That stayed with him. Ranger Owen stopped by briefly to check in, his presence grounding the process and procedure. He mentioned that the bunker's interior showed signs of air movement near one wall. Subtle, inconsistent. Nothing to act on yet, just something to note. "Could be drainage," Owen said. "Could be nothing." Cade thought of Nix's attention in the bunker, but said nothing. Not yet. Later that evening, as June finished sealing the last item, she turned to Cade. "There's someone I'd like to consult," she said. "An aviation historian. Curator, actually. Teaches out near the Great Lakes." Cade raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. He's going to tell us it's a lawn ornament." June's lips curved. "If he does, I'll ask him to explain the reinforced hinges." Nix opened one eye and gave Cade a look that felt suspiciously like agreement. They left the library after dusk. The sky had turned the color of ash and lavender. Cade walked June to her car, a sensible sedan with boxes in the back that smelled faintly of old books. "Thank you for trusting the process," she said before getting in. "Thank you for respecting it," he replied. She paused, studying him. "You've seen this kind of care before?" Cade hesitated, then nodded. "In different places." June didn't press. That night, Cade dreamed of paper, not burning, floating. Sheets drifted through dark water, ink still legible, letters clinging to meaning as if refusing to let go. Beneath them, something vast and metallic slept, its surface breathing slowly. He woke with a start. Nix was standing at the foot of the bed, rigid, ears high. Not alarmed, but focused. He wasn't looking at Cade. He was looking at the wall. Cade sat up, heart already pacing. "What is it?" Nix didn't move. He took one step toward the wall, sniffed the air once, then sat. Perfect posture. Waiting. Cade followed his gaze. The wall was bare. Log cabin planks, nothing more. No sound, no movement. Just silence. After a long moment, Nix exhaled and lay back down. Cade didn't sleep again. The next day brought rain, soft, steady, cleansing. Cade spent the morning doing small, grounding tasks, fixing a loose board on the dock, sharpening a blade he didn't need sharpened. His mind kept circling back to June's words. The past has already been through enough. In the afternoon, he returned to the perimeter near the bunker, keeping his distance. Red tape fluttered lightly. Warning signs stood firm. The forest looked unchanged, but Cade knew better. Once you noticed a seam, you never quite forgot it was there. Nix paced along the boundary, nose low, movements controlled. He didn't pull. He didn't linger. Just checked, like he always did. At one point, he stopped and looked up at Cade, eyes steady. "What?" Cade asked softly. Nix turned his head toward the forest road, toward town. Cade felt it then. Not as fear, but as alignment. Pieces moving into place. Archivists, historians, paper and metal and memory, converging. Whatever lay beneath the bunker wasn't done speaking, and neither, he realized, was he. As the rain eased and the light softened, Cade guided Nix back toward home. Behind them, the forest absorbed their footsteps without complaint. Somewhere between the library and the bunker, between ink and steel, the story had begun to surface, not in flames, but in fragments that refused to disappear. Dr. Mason Klein arrived on a Tuesday that smelled of hot pine and distant rain. His car, a faded blue sedan with university parking stickers, layered like old campaign buttons, rolled to a stop near the Ranger trucks. He stepped out slowly, as if measuring the ground before trusting it. Klein was in his late 50s, lean rather than thin, with a posture shaped by years of bending over artifacts and engines. His hair, once dark, had retreated into gray at the temples and crown, leaving behind a scholar's compromise with time. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, leather gloves already creased from use, and a canvas jacket stained faintly with oil that never quite washed out. There was nothing theatrical about him. That, Cade noticed immediately, made him trustworthy. "I appreciate you calling me in," Klein said, shaking hands with Ranger Owen Pike and then Sheriff Lena Crowley. His grip was firm but unhurried. Places like this don't like to be rushed. Cade liked that answer. They walked toward the bunker together, the forest humming with cicadas. Nix moved at Cade's side, steady and silent. Klein noticed the dog right away. "K9?" he asked. "Retired," Cade replied. Klein smiled faintly. "The best kind. They've already learned what matters." Inside the bunker, the air was cooler than the day outside, heavy with the smell of concrete and old metal. Temporary lights had been set up along the walls. The jet sat where it always had, still, immense, patient. Klein circled it slowly, pulling a measuring tape from his pocket, jotting notes on a small pad. He didn't touch anything at first. He looked. He listened. Once he placed a hand flat against the fuselage, eyes closed, like a doctor checking a pulse. "This isn't a combat bird," he said finally. "Trainer or evaluation platform. Cold War era. Likely tied to a regional test program near the Great Lakes." Lena nodded. "We suspected as much." Klein adjusted his glasses. "What matters most is what we don't do next." He looked at each of them in turn. No restoration for flight, no reenactments, no mythology. His voice sharpened just slightly on the last word. "This is conservation," he continued. "Stabilize, preserve. Tell the truth plainly. Nothing heroic, nothing sensational." Cade felt something settle in his chest, a line drawn where he could stand. Owen gestured toward the far wall. "We've got signs of airflow there. Subtle." Klein's interest sharpened. "Then that's where we look. Carefully." The technical team worked with quiet precision. Bolts loosened, panels eased open. No prying, no forcing. The kind of work that respected resistance instead of fighting it. Nix lay near Cade's boots, head resting on his paws, eyes tracking every movement. He wasn't anxious. He was present. Behind a narrow access panel, they found the compartment. It was smaller than the main bay, tucked into the bunker wall like a secret kept, out of habit rather than malice. Inside, there was no gold, no weapons, no cinematic treasure. There was a steel box, sealed with care. Klein opened it slowly. Inside lay a cloth-wrapped bundle, preserved against moisture. When the cloth was unwrapped, it revealed two things: a letter sealed in a cracked wax envelope, and a small metal tag, dulled with age. Klein lifted the tag and wiped it gently with a soft cloth. The name emerged letter by letter. Elias Rowe. The room seemed to exhale. Cade stared at the tag longer than he meant to. A name did that. It took the abstract and made it human. Not a project, not an artifact, a person. Klein unfolded the letter with gloved hands and read silently at first. His brow furrowed, not in surprise, but in recognition. "This is personal," he said finally, "and deliberate." Lena stepped closer. "What does it say?" Klein looked up. "It describes an accident, a training incident. Mechanical failure during evaluation. No casualties, but enough risk that the program was halted." He hesitated. "And a decision," Klein continued. "The writer, Elias Rowe, argues against dismantling the aircraft for parts or display. He believes it would distort what happened. He requests it be sealed and recorded, not sold or celebrated." Cade felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He knew that voice, the voice that chose a quieter truth over a louder lie. "Elias doesn't write like a hero," Klein added. "He writes like a man trying to live with a choice." Nix rose and walked toward the open compartment. He lay down beside it, body angled protectively, breathing slow. Cade stepped forward and placed his palm against the jet's skin. The metal was cool, solid, real. For a moment, he imagined the hands that had once worked here. Checking bolts, tracing seams, making decisions that wouldn't make headlines. Klein replaced the items carefully. "These will be transferred to controlled archival storage," he said. "Handled properly?" Lena nodded. "I'll authorize it." As the team began sealing the compartment again, Nix did something unexpected. He stood, moved closer to Cade, and pressed his forehead gently against Cade's thigh. Not urgent, not fearful. Grounding. Cade looked down. Nix's eyes were steady, clear. No warning, no alarm, just presence. Cade understood then that this wasn't about discovery. It was about responsibility. Somewhere between the steel and the paper, a line had been drawn, and Nix, in his wordless way, was reminding Cade where he stood. Cade breathed out slowly and nodded once, as if answering a question no one had asked. The work wrapped up by late afternoon. The compartment was resealed. Documentation finalized. Chain of custody forms signed. Klein packed his tools and approached Cade near the bunker entrance. "You're going to get interest," he said quietly. "People who see value in owning stories." Cade's mouth tightened. "I figured." Klein studied him. "You don't strike me as someone who enjoys attention." "I don't," Cade said. "But I do enjoy doing things right." Klein smiled, just slightly. Elias Rowe would have appreciated that. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched long across the clearing. Vehicles departed one by one. Silence returned, deeper now, heavier with meaning. Cade walked Nix back toward the cabin as evening cooled the air. The forest smelled of sap and damp earth. Crickets began their song. When they reached the porch, Cade noticed something resting against the doorframe. A business card. Cream-colored, heavy stock, minimalist design. Addison Vale Heritage Acquisition Fund. Cade picked it up slowly. Nix stood beside him, watching. The name meant nothing to Cade yet. But the implication was clear enough. Someone else had been listening. 3 weeks was enough time for summer to make itself comfortable. The lake warmed. Tourists arrived in sensible shoes. The town learned how to pronounce words like preservation and heritage without laughing. And Cade Holloway learned what it felt like to be watched. Not with suspicion, but with hope. Hope was heavier. The first meeting took place in the community hall, a low wooden building with folding chairs and a coffee pot that never quite emptied. Sheriff Lena Crowley stood at the front, posture straight, presence steady. June Waverly sat near the aisle, hands folded over a legal pad. Ranger Owen Pike leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes tracking exits out of habit. Cade took a seat near the side. Nix settled at his feet, calm and unobtrusive. The dog's ears flicked occasionally at raised voices, but his body remained loose, confident. He had learned the difference between danger and noise. The door opened quietly. Addison Vale entered without announcement, as if she'd timed her arrival to the room's natural pause. She was in her late 30s, tall and slender, dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer over a soft cream blouse. Her hair, dark auburn, fell in a smooth wave to her shoulders, meticulously cared for without appearing fussy. Her skin was pale, unlined, and her smile was the kind that arrived before her eyes did. When she shook hands, she held contact just long enough to suggest sincerity. "Thank you for having me," she said, voice warm, measured. "I know how protective communities can be of their history." She carried a leather folio that looked expensive without trying to impress. When she spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Addison represented the Heritage Acquisition Fund, a private organization with a polished website and carefully worded mission statements. She spoke of resources, of climate-controlled storage, of professional conservators and traveling exhibits. She spoke of opportunity. "This aircraft," she said gently, "deserves more than obscurity. With the right stewardship, it can educate thousands, inspire understanding, preserve the past properly." Several people nodded. Cade felt the room lean. Sheriff Lena didn't interrupt. She waited. Addison turned slightly, including Cade in her gaze, without singling him out. "And of course," she added, "none of this happens without the blessing of those who found it, those who protected it." Cade felt eyes shift toward him. He kept his expression neutral, hands resting on his knees. Nix's tail tapped once against the floor, slow, controlled. June spoke up. "What exactly would your fund require?" Addison smiled, ready. "Legal transfer of ownership, exclusive curatorial rights. We would handle conservation and exhibition. The town would receive recognition and a percentage of proceeds." "Ownership," Lena repeated. "Yes," Addison said. "Responsibility follows ownership." Cade heard the word responsibility land wrong. After the meeting, people lingered in small knots, voices hushed but animated. Addison spoke with business owners, donors, council members. She moved easily among them, listening more than talking. Collecting concerns like data points, she approached Cade near the exit. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "may we talk?" "Cade," he replied. She nodded, acknowledging the boundary. "Cade, I wanted to thank you. None of this would exist without your restraint." Nix looked up at her, head tilted slightly. "I appreciate that," Cade said. "But restraint isn't ownership." Addison's smile softened. "No, but it's stewardship, something my father believed deeply in." That caught Cade's attention. He was a veteran, she continued, not unkindly, and a collector. He believed artifacts were safest when removed from public neglect. "And did they stay safe?" Cade asked. Addison hesitated. "Just long enough to be human. They stayed intact." It wasn't the same answer. That night, Cade drove the long way home. The road wound past the lake, moonlight silvering the water. Nix lay in the back seat, chin on his paws, watching the world slide by. At the cabin, Cade built a small fire and sat on the porch steps. The woods breathed around him. Crickets stitched the dark together. A knock came just after 9. Cade stood, hand resting lightly near his pocket knife, then opened the door. Dr. Priya Nand stood on the porch, rain jacket folded over her arm. She was in her early 40s, average height with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes that missed very little. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore comfortable shoes that suggested long days on her feet. "Hope this isn't too late," she said. "Not for you," Cade replied. They sat side by side, the fire casting soft light across their faces. Nix moved closer and lay at Cade's feet, resting his head against Cade's shin. Priya didn't rush. She never did. "You're being asked to make a decision," she said finally. "And it's not about money." Cade stared into the fire. "It's about control." "And trust," Priya added. He nodded. "I've seen what happens when stories get sold," Cade said quietly. "They get simpler, cleaner, easier to digest. That letter, Elias, he didn't want that." Priya watched Nix's steady breathing. "And what do you want?" Cade thought of the bunker, the quiet, the weight of the name on the tag. "I want it to stay honest," he said, "even if that makes it smaller." Priya smiled gently. "Then you already know your answer." Nix shifted, pressing more weight against Cade's leg, a grounding, familiar pressure. Later, as Priya prepared to leave, Nix rose and walked toward Addison's business card, which sat on the small table by the door. He sniffed it once. Then he turned away. Nix didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't react. He simply chose distance. Cade felt something inside him click. Not suspicion, not fear. Recognition. Trust, he realized, wasn't built on promises. It was built on patterns. The next morning brought rain and news. June called just after 8. "Cade," she said, voice tight. "The library alarm went off last night. Someone tried the archive door." Cade was dressed and moving before she finished the sentence. By the time he arrived, Sheriff Lena was already there, standing beneath the library's overhang, rain dripping from her hat brim. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. The glass doors were intact. The lock bore fresh scratches. "Unsuccessful," Lena said. "But intentional." Cade nodded. "They weren't after the plane." "No," Lena agreed. "They were after the paper." Nick stood beside Cade, ears forward, gaze fixed on the door. The town's memory had become valuable, and value, Cade knew, had a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. By midsummer, the lake had learned how to celebrate. Sunlight spilled across the water like warm honey, catching on the wakes of wooden boats and the chrome of old outboard motors. The air smelled of charcoal, sunscreen, and something sweet frying too long on a grill. Music drifted from the far end of the shore. Guitars, laughter, the loose rhythm of people who believed, at least for a day, that nothing bad could reach them here. Cade Holloway stood at the edge of the festival grounds and considered turning back. Crowds pressed at him from all sides, families, veterans in ball caps stitched with unit names, kids chasing each other with sticky hands. He wore his usual field jacket despite the heat, sleeves pushed up, boots dusty from the walk. Nix walked at his heel, harness snug, posture relaxed but attentive. The dog's presence made a narrow corridor around them, an invisible line people instinctively respected. "You don't have to stay long," June Waverly said gently, stood beside Cade, a little straighter than usual, wearing a light blue linen dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her silver hair was pinned more carefully today, though a few strands had already escaped. In the sunlight, she looked less like an archivist and more like a grandmother history itself might trust. "They'll listen to you," she added. "Not because you're loud, because you're real." Cade exhaled through his nose. "That's what worries me." June smiled. "History doesn't need heroes. It needs witnesses." They walked together toward the small wooden stage near the lake. Sheriff Lena Crowley was already there, speaking with the town council. She wore her uniform but had removed her hat, dark hair pulled back tight as always, even off duty. She carried herself like the line between order and chaos depended on her spine. Ranger Owen Pike stood a little apart, scanning the tree line out of habit. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. He caught Cade's eye and nodded once. Near the stage, a man Cade hadn't seen before was leaning against a tool chest, arms folded. He was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with hands like iron clamps and a posture bent not by age, but by decades of leaning into engines. His beard was white and unruly, his cap stained with grease older than some of the boats on the lake. "That," June murmured, "is Gus Merriman." Gus noticed them staring and pushed off the chest. "You the SEAL?" he called out, voice rough as sandpaper. Cade blinked. "Depends who's asking." Gus grinned, revealing teeth worn but honest. "Good. Means you don't need a speech." Gus Merriman had once worked at a hangar near the old training grounds, back when the Cold War still had a pulse. He'd stayed when others left, fixing what could be fixed, salvaging what shouldn't be forgotten. People called him stubborn. Gus preferred useful. Sheriff Lena stepped to the microphone. "All right," she said, voice carrying easily over the crowd. "Let's bring it in." The music faded. Conversations softened. The lake itself seemed to listen. "We're here today," Lena continued, "because this town found something it didn't expect. And instead of grabbing at it, we chose to look at it together." She gestured toward Cade. This man didn't pry open a door that wasn't his. He called it in. He respected the law and the history. Eyes turned. Cade felt the heat climb his neck. June squeezed his arm once and stepped back. Cade approached the microphone, Nix sitting at his side, calm as stone. He didn't raise his voice. "I didn't find anything alone," Cade said. "Nix did. And after that, the town did." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "What's in that bunker isn't a trophy," he continued. "It's not a weapon. It's not a story we polish until it shines. It's a lesson, one with weight. And lessons like that don't belong to one person. They belong where they're found." He stepped back. The applause came slower than he expected, but it lasted longer. Sheriff Lena returned to the microphone. "Today, we're announcing the Hangar Club, a volunteer preservation group operating under state oversight with guidance from Ranger Pike and Dr. Mason Klein. No private ownership, no closed doors." Gus stepped forward without invitation, took the mic, and squinted into the sun. "Don't call it a war trophy," he said. "Call it a mistake that learned something." Laughter burst out, sharp and surprised. Gus nodded, satisfied, and stepped down. The festival flowed on. Kids climbed into boats. Old men argued over engine specs. Cade found himself answering questions he hadn't planned for. About service, about Nix, about why he stayed. Nix handled the attention with quiet dignity, allowing brief pats, leaning into familiar hands. He was 9 now, muzzle just starting to gray, movements economical. His eyes never stopped scanning. As the afternoon deepened, June excused herself toward the library. "I need to check something," she said, frowning slightly. "We've been rotating materials since the alarm incident. Just a routine thing." Lena nodded. "I'll have someone nearby." Cade watched her go, unease brushing the back of his mind. Nix stopped walking. It wasn't abrupt. It was deliberate, like a decision made after calculation. His ears lifted. His nose angled toward the path leading behind the library, away from the music and sunlight. Cade followed his gaze. Nothing obvious moved there. Just shade. Just trees. Nix inhaled once, deeply, then again. His body shifted. Not aggressive, not afraid. Alert. Cade's pulse quickened. He touched Nix's harness lightly. Easy, he murmured. Nix didn't pull. He waited. Cade looked toward Sheriff Lena. She was already watching them, hand resting near her radio. A pattern, Cade thought. Not panic. A pattern. Nix turned his head, toward Cade, then back toward the path, as if asking a question without words. Cade nodded. Lena spoke quietly into her radio. The festival continued, unaware. Behind the library, the air was cooler, shadows thickening where sunlight couldn't reach. The back door stood closed. Too closed. Nix moved first, silent as breath. He sniffed the handle, then stepped back, muscles tightening. Cade caught the faint smell then, metal, oil, something synthetic. Nix gave one sharp bark. Not a warning, a marker. Sheriff Lena and two deputies rounded the corner seconds later. One of them, a young man with nervous eyes and a buzz cut too fresh to look comfortable, had his hand on his cuffs. The door rattled once, then stopped. "Come out," Lena called, voice firm. "Now." A figure emerged slowly from the shadows. A man in his 40s, lean, unshaven, eyes darting. He wore gloves too thin for work and carried a small pry tool he dropped immediately. "Wrong place," he muttered. Lena didn't argue. They cuffed him without struggle. Nix sat, watching, ears forward. Inside the library, June stood pale but composed, clutching a folder to her chest. "They were trying the archive door again," she said quietly. "They didn't get in." Lena nodded. "They weren't after the plane." "No," June said. "They were after the letter." The man was led away. The festival's music swelled again, the sound of relief covering what had nearly happened. Cade knelt beside Nix and pressed his forehead briefly to the dog's. "Good work." Nix's tail thumped once. As evening settled and lanterns lit the shoreline, Addison Vale appeared at the edge of the crowd. She stood apart, blazer draped over one arm, expression composed, but eyes shadowed. When Cade approached, she didn't smile. "I didn't authorize this," she said quietly, glancing toward the library. "But I know the kind of people who would." "And that doesn't worry you?" Cade asked. Addison met his gaze. "It does. More than you think." "I think you believe you're right," Cade said. "That's what worries me." She swallowed. "I thought I was saving it." "Saving something isn't the same as owning it," Cade replied. Addison looked past him, to the lake, the people, the lights reflected on water. "I may have been wrong," she said softly. She left without another word. Later that night, after the last grill cooled and the lake returned to quiet, June sat at her desk beneath a single lamp. Cade and Nix stood nearby. June held an envelope, hands trembling slightly. "This arrived this afternoon," she said, "forwarded from another state." She opened it carefully. "I believe," she continued, voice thickening, "that Elias Rowe has family." Cade felt the words land like a held breath finally released. Outside, the lake reflected the moon, whole, patient, and waiting. By the time summer leaned toward its closing days, the work had learned how to breathe. The bunker no longer felt like a wound in the forest. It felt like a scar. Cleaned, respected, and left visible on purpose. Under the guidance of Dr. Mason Klein and the steady hands of the Hangar Club, the aircraft had been gently transformed without being rewritten. Rust was arrested, not erased. Moss was cleared where it threatened structure, but left where it told the truth of time. Supports were added, discreet and honest. Lights were placed not to dramatize, but to reveal. The jet did not gleam, it rested. Beside it, a series of panels told the story in plain language. The origin of the training program, the night of the incident, the decision to seal the aircraft rather than turn it into parts or spectacle. No euphemisms, no heroic framing. Just facts, consequences, and the quiet weight of responsibility. Children read the panels aloud, stumbling over longer words. Parents corrected them gently. Veterans stood with hands clasped behind their backs, nodding at things they recognized but had never said out loud. Cade Holloway watched from the edge of the hangar space, arms folded loosely across his chest. He wore the same field jacket he always did, sleeves rolled, boots revealing their age honestly. He hadn't planned to stay long, but time kept slipping past him like water. Nix lay at his feet, older now in the way good dogs aged, with dignity. His muzzle had grayed further over the summer, and his movements had slowed just enough to be noticeable to someone who knew him well. His eyes, though, were unchanged, steady, present. "This is where he would have stood," said Dr. Klein quietly beside Cade, gesturing to a spot near the aircraft's nose. "The mechanic, or the pilot, hard to know." Cade nodded. "Sometimes it doesn't matter." "No," Klein agreed. "Sometimes it matters that someone did." A car arrived at the edge of the clearing not long after. Sheriff Lena Crowley was the first to notice. She straightened, expression shifting from ease to focus. Not alarmed, just attentive. June Waverly stepped forward, smoothing the front of her cardigan. That'll be her. The woman who stepped out of the car was small and bird-like, wrapped in a pale gray coat despite the warmth. She moved carefully, as if each step were a negotiation with old injuries. Her hair was thin and white, pulled back into a low bun that revealed a neck creased by time. Her skin was translucent, veins faintly visible beneath, and her eyes, sharp blue, took in the clearing with a mixture of awe and restraint. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Rowe," June said softly. "Elias's aunt." Eleanor looked at June, then at the bunker, then at the aircraft resting within. Her mouth trembled once, then settled. "I always wondered," she said, voice thin but steady. "I always wondered where he left that part of himself." Cade stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Cade." She studied him, eyes moving over his stance, his posture, the quiet alertness that never quite left him. "You're the one with the dog?" "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze shifted to Nix. Something in her expression softened. "He looks like a good listener." Nix lifted his head and met her eyes. He didn't move closer. He didn't retreat. He simply watched, calm and open. Eleanor reached out slowly, letting him choose. Nix stood and stepped forward, allowing her fingers to brush the fur along his shoulder. She inhaled sharply. "Oh," she whispered. "That's him." Cade frowned gently. "Him?" "My brother had a dog once," Eleanor said. "During the war, not the same, of course. But the way this one looks at you, it's the same way." They walked together into the hangar space. Eleanor stopped when she saw the display case holding the small metal tag. Elias Rowe. Her breath left her in a long, careful exhale, as if she had been holding it for decades. She pressed her fingers to the glass, not touching the tag itself, but hovering close, like a prayer. "He never talked about the night," she said, "only that something had gone wrong, and that doing the right thing didn't always feel like relief." June handed her a chair, but Eleanor waved it off. "Later," She reached into her coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper, edges worn thin. "I brought something," she said. "I wasn't sure if it mattered anymore." She handed it to Cade. It was a letter, older than the one in the bunker, written in a careful hand that favored clarity over flourish. Eleanor nodded toward it. "He sent me that after the hangar fire, the one nobody likes to remember." Cade read silently. Elias had written of smoke and shouting, of a dog trapped by fallen debris. A military working dog, panicked, trained, brave, and terrified all at once. Elias had gone back in after the order to clear out. He hadn't written about courage. He'd written about choice. "If someone ever finds what we sealed," the letter read, "tell them this. Trust the dog before you trust the fear. Fear lies when it thinks it's protecting you." Cade felt the words settle into him, heavy and exact. Nix moved closer and sat at his side, shoulder pressed against Cade's leg. Cade lowered the letter and looked at Eleanor. "Thank you," he said. It felt inadequate. It was all he had. As Eleanor finished speaking, Nix rose and walked toward the aircraft. No one guided him. No one stopped him. He approached the display with unhurried steps and lay down near the nose, placing his head on his paws. He exhaled slowly, deeply, then closed his eyes. It wasn't guarding. It wasn't working. It was resting. The room fell quiet. Not from instruction, but from instinct. Cade felt a tightness in his chest ease, as if something long braced had finally been allowed to lean back. For the first time since the forest had shown him the seam in the earth, Cade felt no pull forward, only arrival. The afternoon unfolded gently after that. Children asked Eleanor questions, which she answered when she could and laughed off when she couldn't. Veterans lingered, speaking in low voices about machines they'd trusted and mistakes they'd survived. June took notes, not for records, but for memory. Sheriff Lena stood near the entrance, watching people move in and out, satisfied. Ranger Owen leaned against a post, finally letting himself look tired. Addison Vale did not return. No one asked about her. As the sun angled west, Cade walked Eleanor back to her car. She paused before getting in. "You gave him back to us," she said. "Not the machine, the man." Cade shook his head. "He was already here," she smiled. "Sometimes it takes the right kind of silence for people to hear that." When she left, the forest seemed to close in softly behind her, like a door that trusted itself to shut. Evening came with gold light filtering through the pines. The hangar lights dimmed automatically, leaving the aircraft in a soft glow that suggested presence without demand. Cade sat on a bench near the lake, Nix beside him, water lapping gently at the shore. A group of kids passed by, one reading aloud from a pamphlet about the project. A veteran nodded to Cade in thanks. Somewhere behind them, laughter carried. Cade leaned back and let the sound wash over him. "All right," he said quietly, fingers scratching behind Nix's ear. "Next time, you lead me somewhere with fish." Nix's tail wagged once, just once, like a signature. The lake reflected the sky. The aircraft rested. The story stayed whole. And for the first time in a long while, Cade felt like he had come home. Not to a place, but to a way of being that allowed the past to sit where it belonged. Behind him, the forest stood watch. Ahead of him, life moved on. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive as thunder or fire. Sometimes they come quietly, through a loyal dog, a hidden truth, or a choice to do what is right when no one is watching. In this story, the miracle was not the aircraft or the history buried beneath the forest. The miracle was guidance. The kind that reminds us that God often speaks through simple things, through animals who feel before we understand, through conscience when fear is loud, through moments that ask us to choose truth over comfort. In our everyday lives, we may not uncover bunkers or lost machines, but we face decisions just as real. To protect what is honest, to listen when something deep inside tells us to slow down, to trust that God is still working even when the path is quiet and unclear. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on where guidance has shown up in your own life. Maybe through a person, maybe through an animal, maybe through a moment you almost ignored. If you believe stories like this matter, please share this video with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And consider subscribing to K9 Navy SEAL Stories so we can continue sharing stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He watch over you and those you love. And may you never forget that sometimes the smallest signs are carrying the greatest truths.